The wind cut through the square like a knife through bone. Snowflakes swirled sideways, stinging Grace Fletcher's face as she stood barefoot on the rough wooden platform, her wrists chained together with a strip of iron that bit into her skin. Her toes were blue. Her pride, long since cracked, felt like it might finally splinter. Elias stood behind her breath, sour with whiskey gripping her shoulder, like a man holding down a steer at branding. "Keep your chin up, girl," he hissed in her ear. "No one pays good money for a mutt that won't look up." She kept her eyes on the ground anyway. Looking up meant seeing their faces, those people in thick coats wrapped in wool and cruelty. Bitter Ridge wasn't a kind town in winter. Or ever. The auctioneer's voice barked through the storm. $300 owed. Debt must be cleared before sunset. "We start at 150, any takers," a few men in the crowd laughed. Someone spat in the snow. "She's too big to work. Hell feed her to the pigs, call it even." The laughter rolled through the square like a cold wind. Grace's stomach clenched. She'd imagined this moment in fever dreams for weeks, but reality was worse. The cold, the eyes, the weight of being less than a person, something to be sold, owned, discarded. "Come on now," the auctioneer sang out again, slapping his gloves against the table. "A strong, back-wide shoulders. She'll work like two men who'll give me 100 silence." Elias squeezed harder, his fingers digging through the thin fabric of her dress. "Don't make this worse," he growled. "You're lucky I didn't just leave you with them collectors." Lucky. She almost laughed. She was lucky to be standing here in chains, freezing, while strangers decided what she was worth. "I'm nothing to them," she thought. "Nothing but debt with a heartbeat." Snow gathered in her hair. Her vision blurred from the cold. No one raised a hand. "Not until I'll take her," a voice said. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The sound cut through the chatter like an axe into wood. The crowd parted slowly like a wound being pulled open. A man stepped out from the back, tall, broad-shouldered, wrapped in a dark wolfskin coat dusted with snow. His beard was frosted, his eyes pale as the frozen river. He moved like someone used to walking through storms. Cole McCade didn't look at Elias. He didn't look at the auctioneer. He looked straight at Grace. The auctioneer blinked. "Bid amount, sir, 300, Cole said flatly. His gloved hand reached inside his coat, pulled out a roll of bills, and set it on the table without breaking eye contact with her. The square fell silent. No one laughed now. Elias's grip loosened, shock flickering across his unshaven face. 300, he muttered, as if the number itself betrayed him. "Sold," the auctioneer barked, almost relieved. "To Mr. Cole McCade." The iron around her wrists clanked as someone unlocked it. Her hands dropped to her sides, raw and red. The sudden absence of the chain didn't feel like freedom. It felt like falling through air with no ground beneath her. She stumbled. He didn't speak. He just held out a gloved hand, not to grab her, not to claim her, but to steady her. No one had ever touched her like that. The wagon waited at the edge of the square. Old, but sturdy. Two black horses snorted steam into the icy air. Grace climbed onto the backboard, shivering through the thin cotton of her dress. Cole took the reins. The wagon jolted forward, the sound of wooden wheels crunching through snow, swallowing the last of the town's laughter. They rode in silence. The road wound upward through the Bitter Ridge Pass, where the trees grew tall and black, and the snow deepened into white silence. Grace pulled her knees to her chest, trying to trap whatever heat was left in her body. Every bump in the road shot pain through her wrists, where the iron had bitten skin. She tried to speak twice. Both times the words died before they reached her tongue. Finally, she forced them out. Why? Why'd you buy me? Cole didn't look at her. His eyes stayed on the snow-covered trail ahead. Because no one else did. She waited for more, for cruelty, for something she recognized. Nothing came. Just the sound of hooves in snow. The sun was sinking behind the ridge by the time they reached it, a clearing with a single log cabin built against a wall of pine. A thin column of smoke curled from the chimney, bending with the wind. A corral sat nearby with a few horses, a shed stacked high with firewood. It didn't look like a prison. It didn't look like mercy either. Get inside, he said. Grace climbed down her legs, stiff from the ride. She stepped into the cabin expecting filth, expecting chains, expecting everything she'd learned to fear. What she found instead was order. The floor was swept clean. A fire crackled in the hearth. Tools lined the wall in neat rows. A table with 2 chairs sat near the fire, a lantern flickering soft light over it. The place smelled like wood smoke and dried herbs. It felt lived in. Not by a monster. By a man. Cole removed his gloves and set them on a peg. You're wet. And dirty. Grace stiffened. She'd heard this tone before from men who meant something else. He pointed toward the far wall where a wooden tub sat filled with steaming water. Wash. There's soap and towels. You'll catch death otherwise. She flinched back. Are you no? He said simply, his gaze steady. I'll be outside. He left without closing the door, gently or cruelly. Just like that, he was gone. Grace stared at the tub. Steam curled into the air, fogging the lantern glass. Her hands trembled as she touched the water's edge. Warmth. Real warmth. It had been months since anything had been warm. She peeled away the damp fabric from her skin. The bruises from the shackles stood out like rings on a tree trunk. She lowered herself into the tub, gasping, as the heat seared her frozen limbs before sinking into a deep, aching relief. She closed her eyes. For a long time there was no town, no auctioneer, no laughter, just the sound of water against wood and her own heartbeat. When she climbed out, there was a folded dress waiting on the chair. It was soft flannel, warm, well-kept. A faint scent of lavender clung to it. It was too nice for her. She traced the stitching with her fingers. It wasn't new. It had belonged to someone else. A woman, most likely. A woman he'd loved. Why would he give this to me, she thought. She dressed quickly, still shivering, but no longer frozen. When she caught her reflection in the fogged window pane, damp hair, clean face, bare feet against the wooden floor, it didn't look like the girl from the auction block. Not yet a woman with power. But not entirely broken either. The door creaked. Cole stepped back inside, snow-dusting his coat. His eyes flicked over her once, then away. Eat something. Soup's on the stove. Grace stared at him. Whose dress is this? He didn't look up as he hung his coat. My wife's. She's gone. The air shifted. The fire popped in the hearth. He spoke the way a man might talk to the wind, just enough to be heard, not enough to linger. You can use it, he added. She clutched the fabric against her chest, overwhelmed by a kindness she hadn't earned. I can't eat, he interrupted, not unkindly. Then rest. Grace watched him pour himself a cup of black coffee, hands steady, movements deliberate. She didn't understand him, but for the first time in months, she wasn't afraid. She lowered herself onto the chair, the flannel dress soft against her skin. Snow continued to fall outside, thick and soundless. And in the flickering light of a stranger's cabin, Grace Fletcher, former debt, unwanted woman thing to be sold, drew her first steady breath. The cold bit deeper in the cabin than she expected. Even with the fire cracking in the hearth and soup simmering on the stove, Grace couldn't stop shivering. Maybe it wasn't the chill in the room. Maybe it was the kind that lived under the skin, the kind that crawled in when you'd been standing too long in front of people who called you meat. She sat at the table, both hands wrapped around a chipped ceramic bowl of stew. Steam fogged her lashes. The dress his wife's clung to her skin, still warm from the tub. She'd never worn anything so soft. It was too good for her, and she hated how good it felt. Across from her, Cole McCade sat silently sipping black coffee like it was the only thing keeping him alive. He didn't glance at her. Not once. He stared into the fire as if it might speak to him. Grace took a bite. It was thick with beans, potato, and some kind of cured meat. Salted, earthy, real. "You cooked this?" she asked before she could stop herself. He gave a slow nod. "I'm not dead yet." She almost smiled, but the fear curled in her gut, reminded her, you don't smile at men like him. You wait. You measure. You survive. She tried again. "You live up here alone 3 winters now. What happened to your wife?" His jaw tensed. The spoon paused halfway to his mouth. Grace immediately regretted it. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean pneumonia," he said flatly. "Hit fast. Took her faster." "Oh." Her voice was small. I'm sorry." "Don't be. You didn't kill her." The silence returned thick as the snow outside. She stirred her stew just to keep her hands busy. "You got a name?" he asked after a while. She blinked. "Grace?" He nodded. "I figured you did. Just didn't think anyone ever bothered to use it." She swallowed hard. They didn't. Cole stood without a word, grabbed another log from the stack by the hearth, and tossed it onto the fire. Sparks jumped. His silhouette stretched tall across the cabin wall, broad-shouldered, mountain-cut. There was something quiet about the way he moved. A man who'd built this life piece by piece and didn't owe anything to anyone. And now, she was in the middle of it. "Where do I sleep?" she asked. He pointed to a small alcove curtained off behind the stove. "You'll be warm in there." Grace carried her bowl to the sink, washed it without being asked, then stepped through the curtain. Inside was a simple cot with thick wool blankets and a pine chest beneath the window. She lay down still, half expecting the door to crash open. Elias's voice to boom in the chains to return. But none of that came. Instead, her eyes fluttered closed to the sound of a man stoking the fire and the wind brushing gently against the log walls. She didn't dream. The next morning came with the scent of coffee and cedar smoke. Grace woke to birdsong, not the harsh caw of crows, but soft thrushes somewhere in the pines. She blinked into the morning light that filtered through the frost-covered window. She dressed quickly and stepped out into the main room. Cole had already been up for hours. He stood by the front door, wrapping leather around his wrist's coat slung across one shoulder. "You're up early," he said. "I can help," she offered, unsure. He looked her over once like he was measuring something. "You know how to chop wood, no. But I can learn." "Fair enough." He handed her a smaller axe, nodded toward the woodpile outside. "Split logs until your arms ache. That's when you stop." Grace took the axe with both hands, her fingers still stiff from the cold. She followed him out into the morning light. Snow glittered under the pale sky. The mountain air was sharp, but it didn't feel cruel, just honest. The chopping was harder than it looked. Her palms blistered fast, but every swing, every crack of wood against steel felt like shaking off something heavy she'd carried too long. Inside, Cole worked quietly repairing snowshoes, boiling water, tending to leather traps. He didn't hover. He didn't command. He just let her move through the day like she belonged. Around midday, they shared bread and dried venison by the fire. Grace had stopped flinching at his silence. It was a different kind of quiet, one that didn't punish. Later, while folding clothes near the hearth, she paused to smell the collar of the flannel shirt she'd been wearing. It smelled like lavender pine and something older grief, maybe. The kind that stains a place but doesn't ruin it. She heard his voice from the door. "Those belong to Miriam." She turned. Cole leaned in the doorway, arms crossed. She made most of the clothes herself. Wouldn't buy what she could stitch. Grace swallowed. "I can mend things too. I figured. You've got the hands for it." She looked down at her fingers, raw, cracked, but steady. No man had ever said anything kind about her hands. "I don't want to ruin what was hers," she said softly. "She's gone, Grace. Been gone a long time. Better someone wear them than let 'em rot in a chest." Grace folded the shirt carefully and set it beside her. The fire warmed her face, but the warmth went deeper than skin now. "Did you love her?" Cole didn't answer right away. "Yeah, I did." She didn't press. Some names weren't meant to be spoken too often. They left bruises when they came out. The rest of the day passed in quiet rhythm. Grace fed chickens, repaired a hole in the rug, warmed water for evening wash. There was no shouting, no grabbing, no orders barked in anger. Just two people sharing a space and not pretending it meant anything more than what it was, but still, something shifted. That night, as they both sat by the fire, Cole sharpening a blade, Grace mending a glove, she felt something inside her unclench. It had lived there for years, fear, shame, worthlessness like a knot of cold under her ribs. Now, under flickering firelight and a roof that didn't leak, it started to thaw. Cole didn't look up when he spoke. "Tomorrow I head for the ridge. You can come if you've got the strength." Grace set her stitching down. "You want me to come? You'll freeze if you sit still all day. Might as well see the land you're working off." She let out a breath, almost smiling. "Working off, huh? Not property anymore." His mouth twitched, almost a grin. "I don't own people, Grace." She nodded slowly. Something softened in her chest. As he stood to stoke the fire one last time, Grace whispered half to herself, "I don't know what this place is yet." He didn't turn, just pulled on his coat. "But it don't feel like hell." Snow crunched beneath Grace's boots as she followed Cole up the narrow trail behind the cabin. The early light hadn't yet warmed the ridges of Bitter Ridge Pass, and the forest still held its breath under a blanket of frost. Pines lined both sides of the path like silent sentinels, limbs heavy with white. Grace's thighs burned with each step. The snow came nearly to her knees in some parts, and Cole's stride, long and deliberate, wasn't easy to match. Still, he never walked so far ahead that she lost sight of him. "You all right?" he asked over his shoulder. She nodded, breath puffing in the cold. "I've been through worse." He didn't argue. He only offered his hand when the trail curved over slick stones or down into icy hollows. Every time his touch was brief and steady, and every time he let go as soon as she was balanced. They didn't speak much. There wasn't need to. The silence here wasn't empty. It was honest. About an hour into the hike, Cole stopped at a split tree and crouched near a metal trap half buried in snow. Grace watched as he inspected the mechanism, then gently opened it with a practiced flick of his wrist. A small red fox lay inside, trembling, alive barely. Cole reached into his coat, pulled out a strip of meat, and held it out, murmuring something low under his breath. His voice was too quiet for her to hear, but his tone was kind. The fox sniffed, then limped out of the trap, dragging one paw behind it. Cole watched it disappear into the trees. "You let it go," Grace said softly. He stood, brushed his gloves together. "Wasn't meant for me. But you could have kept it." "I could have." He glanced at her. "But not everything you catch is meant to be kept." She didn't answer. She just kept walking, that sentence following her through the trees like smoke. They reached the top of the ridge near midday. The land opened up around them in a sweep of white and stone. From here, Bitter Ridge looked like a toy town in the distance, tiny, boxed in, far away. The sky was pale, heavy with light, and the sun shone low and cold. Cole knelt beside another trap. This one was empty, sprung the bait gone. He reset it with calm precision. Grace sat on a fallen log, pulling her shawl tighter. "How long have you been doing this trapping?" She nodded. "Since I was 15. My father taught me." What happened to him? He looked out across the trees. Got caught between a mining claim and a shotgun. Took 2 days to die. I was with him for both. Grace flinched. "I'm sorry." He shrugged, not unkindly. "I was too young to understand what it meant to leave." They sat in silence for a while. The wind sang through the trees like a low fiddle. Grace looked down at her hands, blistered from chopping wood, and then up at his. "You live like this on purpose. It's quiet. Out here, no one lies about what they want." She thought about Elias, about the way he smiled while he chained her wrists, about the auctioneer pretending dignity made it lawful, about the crowd that laughed as if she were a joke. And here in the woods, a man who said little, who touched nothing that didn't need touching, who let foxes live and people choose. Grace pulled her knees to her chest. "I don't think anyone's ever looked at me without seeing what they could get from me." Cole didn't speak. He just handed her a strip of jerky from his pack and a tin cup of coffee. No pity, no advice, just company. She sipped slowly. It burned going down, but it was a good burn. Real. After they ate, he checked 3 more traps, all empty. As they turned to head back, the snow started to fall again, soft and steady. The world hushed. Halfway down the trail, Grace slipped on a patch of ice and went down hard, scraping her palms. She winced, half expecting a reprimand. Instead, Cole was already beside her, kneeling. "You all right?" She nodded, breathless. "I'm fine." He reached into his coat, pulled out a square of cloth, and handed it to her. She stared at it. "Why are you—" "Nice to me," Cole looked at her, his gaze quiet and sharp all at once. "Because you deserve it." "No," she said quickly. "You don't even know me." He hesitated. Then didn't know Miriam either, not at first. She grew into everything. Grace's heart twisted. "Do I look like her? Not at all." She nodded, unsure if that stung or soothed. "You don't need to," he added. They walked the rest of the way in silence. By the time they reached the cabin, Grace's legs were aching, but her chest felt strangely light. She wasn't sure if it was the walk, the talk, or just breathing air that didn't judge her. Cole fed the horses while Grace lit the stove and reheated the stew. She didn't wait to be told. That night they sat across from each other as the storm picked up outside. Thunder cracked in the distance, rolling low over the pass. Cole finished sharpening his knife, wiped the blade clean, and looked up. I'll be heading farther tomorrow, up near Devil's Hollow. Grace paused. You want me to come again? You don't have to. She looked at the flames. Then at him. I want to. A long silence. Then the faintest hint of a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. That night, Grace lay awake in the alcove, staring at the ceiling beams. The wind howled across the roof, but inside the fire still burned steady. Something had shifted between them. Something real. She wasn't sure what it was yet, but for once it didn't scare her. She closed her eyes, replaying that moment at the trap. The way he let the fox go. The way he looked at her not like a man who owned her, but like a man who saw her. You saved the fox, she said. He looked at her and replied, "Not everything caught is meant to be kept." The knock on the cabin door wasn't gentle. It was hard, sharp, a sound that didn't belong in the quiet of the mountain. It cracked across the walls like a warning. Grace dropped the ladle she was using to stir the stew. Cole had gone out to check the snares down by the creek. She was alone. Another knock, harder this time. Her hands froze mid-air. The air felt heavier than it had seconds before. Something cold coiled in her stomach, colder than any snow. She stepped to the door and opened it just a crack. And there he stood. Elias Fletcher. In a wool coat too fine for a man who owed more than he owned, with a smile too smug for someone who'd sold his own blood. "Well, well," he drawled, tugging off his gloves. "Look at you, dressed up like a housewife playing Mountain Queen." Grace tried to shut the door. Elias shoved his boot in the crack before she could. "Don't be rude to your kin. I came for what's mine." "You sold me," she snapped, forcing the door back with her shoulder. "You gave that up." He pushed harder. She stumbled back. Two men appeared behind him, one tall, wiry, and mean-looking, the other in a sheriff's badge that looked tarnished in more ways than one. The one with the badge raised a folded piece of paper. "Got a writ here, Miss Fletcher. Signed and sealed down in the county office. Says your debt wasn't fully paid." "That's a lie," she whispered. "Paper says otherwise," the sheriff replied, eyes flat. "We're here to collect." Grace's breath came short and sharp. She looked behind them, hoping for a shadow, a sign that Cole was near. Nothing. Just snow and sky. "I'm not going," she said. Elias stepped forward. "You don't get a say." "Yes, she does," a voice growled behind them. All three men turned. Cole McCade stood at the edge of the trees, rifle slung across his shoulder, snow melting off the brim of his hat. His face was still, his eyes unreadable. He walked slow and steady to the front of the cabin, stopping just in front of Grace. Then he turned to face the men. "You're trespassing." The sheriff raised the paper. "We've got legal cause." "No, you've got forged ink," Cole said. "The auction house gave me a receipt. I paid full." "Doesn't matter," Elias spat. "You think they'll take your word over mine and over a sheriff's?" Cole didn't flinch. "You think that badge makes you law up here?" The wiry man reached for his sidearm. Bad move. Cole's rifle was off his shoulder and leveled at the man's chest in the blink of an eye. "I wouldn't," he said low and calm. "You won't live to regret it." The mountain air went still. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The sheriff's mouth opened, then closed. Elias stepped back, pale now, his hands twitching. Grace moved closer to Cole. Her voice shook, but didn't break. "I was paid for. I saw the receipt. He's lying." The sheriff hesitated, then lowered the paper. Even if you're right, it's not settled yet. This needs to be handled proper. Then ride back down and get the right judge, Cole said. You show your face here again without real papers, you won't leave on a horse. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Elias scoffed and spat into the snow. This ain't over, McCade. You don't get to keep what ain't yours. She's not mine, Cole said, his voice like stone. That's the point. The sheriff gave a curt nod and turned. His men followed their retreat more like a retreat than they'd admit. Grace didn't breathe until they were out of sight. Only then did her knees buckle. Cole caught her before she hit the ground. I'm sorry, she said, voice raw. I didn't think he'd come back. He helped her sit on the porch steps, his coat draped over her shoulders. He's a coward. But cowards are dangerous when they're losing. I don't want to go back, she whispered. You're not. Tears burned her eyes, but none fell. Not yet. Why'd you stand up for me? He sat beside her, arms resting on his knees. Because you don't deserve to be taken again. Not by anyone. Not ever. Grace looked down at her hands. They were shaking. Inside the cabin, the fire still burned. The stew was still hot. But outside, something had changed. This mountain wasn't just a hiding place anymore. It was a battleground. And she wasn't just a guest in this man's quiet world. She was part of it now, whether she liked it or not. Later that night, she lay awake while the wind howled against the eaves. She thought of Elias's face, the false writ, the hand on the door like a claim of ownership. Her stomach twisted. She rose quietly, walked to the main room. Cole was sitting at the table cleaning his rifle lantern light, casting hard shadows. He looked up. Couldn't sleep. Grace shook her head. Every time I close my eyes, I hear him say, I'm his, you're not. I was, she said, for a long time. He nodded slowly. But not now. She sat across from him. You believe that I do, he said, not blinking. But it won't matter until you believe it too. She didn't answer. She just watched him clean the same piece of metal over and over like he could scrub away the memory. I'll go with you tomorrow, she said finally. He glanced up. To Devil's Hollow, he nodded. You said you'd go farther. I want to go with you. I can handle it. His gaze softened just a little. All right. Grace stood, her voice steady. He's not going to scare me back into silence. Cole watched her disappear into the sleeping alcove, the firelight flickering behind her like armor. The knock on the door this time was different. Not heavy, not threatening. Just a few quick raps followed by a cheerful, anyone alive in there? Grace paused mid-chop, half a potato in her hand, and stew bubbling behind her. She exchanged a glance with Cole, who stood by the window, still as stone. Then came the voice again, lighter with a grin baked into it. McCade, you still hiding up here like a mountain ghost? Cole's shoulders eased just a little. It's Callahan, he muttered. He opened the door. There stood Jack Callahan, young, tall, easy on the eyes, wearing a thick duster coat dusted in snow. His brown curls peeked out from under a well-worn hat, and his smile could have warmed a frozen creek. Well, hell, he said when he saw Grace behind Cole. Didn't expect company. Cole stepped aside. Mail run, yup. Brought a few parcels from the station and some news from town. He handed over a burlap sack. Also got a letter here addressed to a Miss Fletcher. Grace blinked. Me? He grinned, tapping the side of his nose. Looks like you're famous now. She took the envelope, fingers stiff with surprise. Jack's eyes lingered on her, kind, curious. You must be the lady I've been hearing about. Depends who's talking, she said warily. He laughed. Fair enough. Cole cleared his throat. You staying long? Long enough for coffee, I hope? Jack replied, glancing toward the warmth inside. Grace, still gripping the letter, nodded toward the stove. It's hot. Jack stepped in, shedding snow and charm in equal measure. He set his satchel down, then turned back to her. You mind if I ask what brought you all the way up here? Grace paused. Debt. Jack whistled. Same as the rest of us, I guess. Just wearing different clothes. That made her smile. A real one. They sat around the table, Cole mostly quiet, sipping from his cup while Jack talked. And he could talk about everything from train robberies down south to a runaway cow that held up the post for 2 hours. Grace listened, half grinning despite herself. Jack had a way of making the room feel lighter, like you forgot the snow outside might kill you. At one point, he leaned toward her. You know the town's been talking. Word is Elias is stirring up trouble. Said McCade's keeping you against your will. He's lying, she said quickly. Jack raised both hands. Hey, I believe you. Just letting you know what's being whispered. Cole's jaw tightened. Elias doesn't whisper. He poisons. Jack stood. Well, I'm just the messenger. But Grace, if things get bad, there's room for you in town. I board with Clara Boone. She's got extra space. Grace looked at him, and for a second she imagined it. Warm beds, a house without fear, laughter. Then she looked at Cole. Silent, steady, cold as the mountain, but twice as solid. I'm fine where I am, she said. Jack nodded, something flickering in his eyes. All right. But you ever change your mind, you've got a way out. He tipped his hat to her, handed Cole a final envelope, and stepped back into the snow. They watched him disappear down the trail. Grace turned the letter in her hands. It was from a woman in Helena, an old neighbor who'd heard about her at the auction. The letter offered prayers and pity. She folded it quietly and slipped it into the chest. Later that evening, Cole stood at the woodpile splitting logs while Grace sat on the porch watching the sky bleed into dusk. Do you think I should have gone with him? She asked. Cole didn't answer right away. Jack's a good man, he said eventually, but he doesn't know what you've been through. He offered safety, so did a lot of men. She nodded slowly. I don't think I need saving anymore. Cole stopped mid-swing. She met his gaze. I think I'm learning how to stand on my own. That night they sat together at the table without speaking much. But something had shifted, not in distance but direction. Grace finished folding a set of mended gloves and looked up. Did you love this quiet before I got here? Cole considered. I thought I did, and now I don't miss it. She looked away, her chest tight with something warm and awful. She didn't know what to do with feelings that didn't come from fear. When she lay down that night, she stared at the beams above just like always. But for the first time, she wondered what it would feel like to build something that was hers. Not escape, not survival. Home. The next few days passed in quiet rhythm: wood stew, snow, mending, feeding, breathing. And always the knowledge that Elias was still out there somewhere below the ridge making plans. Then one morning Cole came in with a strange look on his face. A rider had been spotted down the pass, 2 horses, heavy boots, and a coat trimmed in silver. He's coming, Cole said simply, and he's not coming alone. Grace's hands clenched around the edge of the table. She stood. Then we don't wait. Grace stood at the sink, elbows deep in soapy water sleeves rolled past her elbows. Outside, the wind curled around the cabin in slow circles, dragging dry snow across the porch steps. But inside, the world was warm stew simmering low on the stove bread, cooling on the windowsill, and a quiet sense of motion that felt almost like peace. She hummed while she worked. Nothing fancy. Just a lullaby her mother used to hum while brushing her hair. It slipped out of her mouth before she realized it, light as breath. She almost stopped when she noticed it, but didn't. Behind her, Cole shifted in his chair, the wooden legs creaking softly as he leaned back to listen. "You sing," he said. Grace turned, hands dripping, a little startled. "Didn't mean to," she murmured. "Don't stop on my account." She smiled faintly and returned to the dishes. Her voice, soft and low, drifted back into the air. Later that evening, she swept the cabin floor while Cole sat by the fire sharpening a blade. The lantern flickered above them, throwing long shadows up the log walls. "You ever think about what this place was before it got quiet?" she asked suddenly. He didn't look up. "It wasn't always this quiet. I figured." Cole set the blade down. Miriam used to fill it. Laughter talking. She kept jars of dried flowers on the windowsills. Lavender mostly. She sounds like someone who left everything better than she found it. She was, he said, voice rougher than usual. And then she got sick. Fever hit fast, burned hotter than I'd ever seen. I rode for help, but it was too late. Grace crossed the room slowly and sat down across from him. "You loved her, I still do. Some things don't stop just because time passes." She didn't answer right away. The fire cracked between them, tossing sparks up the chimney. "I'm not trying to replace her, Cole." His eyes met hers. "I know, but I don't want to live under her shadow either." His jaw tensed. "You're not." They sat in silence again. This one wasn't heavy. "Just honest, she died in this cabin," he said eventually, voice low. "Right there on that bed you sleep in now. I wrapped her in the blanket you use every night." Grace swallowed hard. "I tell you that he continued not to haunt you, but so you know I never planned to let anyone else in here again." "But you did," she said. "I did." She leaned back, the woven chair creaking beneath her. "I spent so long thinking I was only good for work or payment. Being here, it's the first place I've ever had where no one asks more than what I want to give." Cole leaned forward. "And what is it you want to give? I don't know yet," she whispered. "But it's mine to choose, isn't it?" He nodded once. "Always." The next morning, the snow melted slightly under the late winter sun, revealing damp patches of earth along the edge of the ridge. Grace stepped outside with a basket of laundry, her boots sinking in the soft mud. As she clipped a sheet to the line, the wind caught it and wrapped it around her, making her laugh out loud, a sound she didn't recognize coming from her own mouth. From the doorway, Cole watched her. Just stood there, arms crossed, a faint warmth softening the edges of his normally hard face. Clara Boone came that afternoon with a sack of flour and a jar of apple jam. "You're not just surviving up here," she said, eyes sharp as ever. "You're living." Grace poured tea while Clara unwrapped a scarf from around her neck. "This cabin used to echo with ghosts," Clara said. "But it doesn't anymore." Grace bit her lip. "Do you think it's wrong for me to be here after her?" Clara leaned in, all business and bone. "Sweetheart, Miriam's been gone a long while. And this place, it needs a woman's hands again. Don't be ashamed of the life you're building. Not even ghosts want a place to stay empty forever." When Clara left, she pressed Grace's hand firmly. "He's still mourning, but he ain't stuck, and neither are you." That night, Cole brought in the last load of chopped wood just before the storm hit. As they sat in front of the hearth, sharing bread and leftover stew, Grace set her spoon down and said, "When the snow thaws, what happens then?" Cole looked up thoughtful. "Life keeps going." "I mean, what happens to me?" He hesitated. "I told you your debt's paid." "I know, that's not what I meant." He didn't speak. Grace stood and walked to the window, watching snow coat the glass. "You ever think about what it'd be like to not be alone again?" His voice was soft when it came. "Every day." She turned, heart thudding. "Do you want me to leave, Cole?" He stood slowly. "I want you to do what feels right. But what feels right for you?" He crossed the room in 2 steps, stopped just short of her. "You already know." The room was quiet. Outside, the wind slammed against the cabin. Inside, 2 broken people stood in the wreckage of old lives, looking at what they could build from it. Grace reached for his hand, not out of fear, not out of need, just because she wanted to. "I'm not her," she whispered. "I don't want you to be." They sat together that night, closer than they'd ever been. No kiss, no promises, just warmth and the quiet understanding that the world might never be kind, but they could be to each other. The wind shifted at dawn, not just in temperature, but in tension, the way the trees stilled, how the crows flew low over the ridge. Grace felt it the second she stepped outside to fetch water from the well. The mountain wasn't breathing easy. By the time she came back inside, Cole was already strapping on his gun belt. "They're coming," he said without looking up. She didn't ask how he knew. He just did. Grace nodded once, then moved to close the shutters. They spent the next hour in silence. Cole checked the rifle-loaded shells with steady fingers. Grace stirred the fire, heart pounding, trying to keep her hands from shaking. Her mind raced, but not with fear, with readiness. When the horses appeared through the tree line, Grace stood by the window watching. 3 riders, Elias in front. Behind him, a new man in a fine coat and a face that looked carved from stone. Deputy, maybe hired gun. The third she didn't recognize, but the badge on his vest glinted cold in the light. A real sheriff this time. Grace turned to Cole. "We don't run." He met her eyes. "We don't." They stepped onto the porch as the riders dismounted. Elias smirked like a man who thought he'd already won. He waved a folded paper in the air. "Morning, sweet niece. Thought I'd stop by for what's mine." Grace didn't move. "You've got no right." The sheriff stepped forward, boots crunching snow. "We have legal grounds. Court order signed 2 days ago. Elias Fletcher claims Miss Grace Fletcher failed to complete a financial obligation. With interest, he claims she still owes him $200. She was bought and paid for," Cole said coldly. "I've got the auction receipt." "You're wasting your time." The sheriff opened his mouth, but Elias cut in. "You really think they'll listen to a mountain man over bloodkin and official ink?" Grace stepped forward. "That's the problem, isn't it?" Her voice didn't tremble. "You all think I'm something to sign over. A body to count, not a soul to ask." The deputy's hand hovered near his gun. Cole saw it didn't flinch. His own fingers rested on the butt of his revolver, calm, casual, deadly. "I've lived under that kind of silence," Grace continued. "The kind that says women don't speak unless spoken to. The kind that turns bruises into business and blood into debt." She looked right at the sheriff. "You can take me back, chain me again. But know this, if you do, you're not just dragging a girl down the mountain. You're dragging her away from the only man who's ever treated her like a person. You'll be proving him right. That law bends for power. That truth never mattered. The sheriff hesitated. Eyes flicked between her and Elias back to the writ. You have no idea what I've done for you, Elias barked. No gratitude, no sense. Just a fat little nothing who… Enough, Cole's voice cracked like thunder. He stepped between them, gun now raised, aimed straight at Elias's chest. You touch her, Cole said, low and firm, and you'll lose more than your pride. The sheriff raised a hand. Put the weapon down, McCade. We don't need bloodshed. She doesn't leave, Cole growled. Elias stepped forward. You gonna shoot a lawman? Cole didn't blink. Try me. The air went still. Cold. Everyone watching, waiting. Then a voice broke the tension. From behind the trees came hooves. Another rider. Sheriff Isaiah Miles. The real one. Black hat, gray beard, and a look that could peel bark from a tree. He rode slow and sure up the path, then dismounted with practiced calm. Sheriff Miles, the paper-holding lawman, said suddenly stiff, We were just enforcing a false claim. Isaiah cut in. He reached into his coat, pulled out a second set of documents. Saw the original receipt myself, stamped, signed, notarized. He handed it to the stunned sheriff. What you're holding is trash. Elias sputtered. This is a damn conspiracy. Isaiah turned on him. No, son. This is justice catching up. You lied. You forged. And you tried to take back what you sold like she was livestock. I don't abide that. Elias's face twisted, but his hands twitched toward his holster. Too late. Cole's gun was up again, clicked back, hammer cocked. Grace stepped in front of him. No, she said. Let me. Elias froze, hand halfway to his gun as she stared him down. You sold me like I was nothing. But I'm not afraid of you anymore. You think this town cares about what you are now? Grace smiled. I don't care what the town thinks. I care what I know. The sheriff took a slow step forward. You can ride down that hill now, Elias. Or you can ride tied to a post. Up to you. Elias cursed, then spat and turned toward his horse. This ain't over, he hissed. You think they'll forget what you are, girl? Grace looked at him, calm and clear-eyed. I'm not what I was, and that scares the hell out of you. He rode off without another word. The fake sheriff and deputy followed silent as ghosts. Sheriff Miles nodded once to Cole. Next time you need backup, don't wait so long. Cole grunted. Didn't want company. Miles looked at Grace, a faint smile tugging at the edge of his mouth. But maybe now you do. He rode off without another word. The clearing was quiet again. Just the wind and the snow and the thud of Grace's heartbeat. She turned to Cole. I thought you were going to shoot him. I was. Why didn't you? He looked at her, mouthing soft under the steel. Because you didn't need me to. Grace exhaled, slow and steady. Then her knees gave out. Cole caught her. Later, as they sat in front of the fire, Grace wrapped in his old flannel coat, she said quietly, You stood beside me. He looked over. That's all I did. No, she said. You gave me room to stand on my own. Spring came slow to Bitter Ridge Pass. The snow didn't vanish. It retreated inch by inch like a stubborn old wound learning to heal. Patches of green crept into the valley first. Then the pine needles began to loosen their burden of white. Birds returned, hesitant at first, then louder. The creek thawed and babbled again. And Grace Fletcher, for the first time in her life, didn't feel like she was waiting for the world to change. She was changing with it. She stood barefoot in the damp soil behind the cabin, sleeves rolled up, hands dirty from planting rows of carrots and beets. Her boots lay by the porch and her dress was patched but clean. The sun kissed her shoulders, and for once she didn't worry who might be watching. Cole leaned against the doorframe, sipping from a chipped enamel mug. He didn't say much, he rarely did, but his eyes followed her with a steadiness that said everything. "You're gonna scare the animals walking around like that," he teased, nodding at her bare feet. She looked over her shoulder and smirked. "You said yourself the land needs tending. I'm tending it. You're also tracking mud inside." Grace lifted a handful of soil and tossed it in his direction. It missed by a mile, but he laughed anyway. They'd fallen into this rhythm, not perfect, not easy, but honest. She worked the garden. He worked the traps and fixed the roof. At night, they sat together on the porch, sometimes speaking, sometimes not. The silence between them wasn't a void anymore. It was full of understanding. Some days, she still woke in a sweat heart pounding, lungs tight. Memories didn't vanish like snow, but they softened, lost their teeth. And on those mornings, she'd find Cole already up, coffee hot, a blanket waiting. "You don't have to stay," he'd told her once. I know she'd said, "That's why I do." One warm morning in May, Jack Callahan returned with a letter and a crate of supplies. He brought stories from town, how Elias had left Bitter Creek entirely, how the forged documents had been publicly burned by Sheriff Miles, how Clara Boone was still scandalized, that Grace hadn't returned to live like a proper lady. "Lady Boone can keep her silver forks," Grace said, smiling. "I've got my own table now." Jack leaned against the porch post, arms crossed. "You're different." She looked up from kneading bread dough. "Better or worse?" He shrugged. "Just more yourself." That night, when Jack had gone and the moon rose full over the mountain, Cole sat beside Grace by the fire. He cleared his throat, rare, and held something in his hand. A small, carved wooden box. "I made this," he said. "Started it last winter. Thought I'd give it to you sooner, but..." He opened it. Inside sat a simple ring made of silver and old pine inlaid with a narrow strip of gold. It wasn't perfect. That made it better. Grace stared at it, breath caught somewhere between her ribs. "I ain't asking for anything out of debt," he said. "Or pity. You've been free from the start. And if you choose to leave tomorrow, you'll walk out that door with your name and your dignity intact." She looked up at him. "But if you want to stay," he continued, voice barely above a whisper. "Not because you need to, but because you want to. I'd be honored to build something with you. Something we both get to choose." Grace reached out, took the ring, and turned it slowly in her fingers. She thought of the girl. She was the man who tried to own her, the auction block, the broken trail, the fox in the trap. She thought of the cabin, the fire, the garden, the way Cole always made space for her voice even when she didn't know she had one. "I don't need saving," she said. He nodded. "I know." She slipped the ring on. It fit. "I'm not staying because I'm grateful," she said. "I wouldn't want that." She leaned in. "I'm staying because this us, it feels like something I finally get to choose. And that means more than any freedom I've ever known." He smiled. "Just a little. Enough." They sat in silence after that, hand in hand, listening to the fire crackle and the creek whisper outside. The garden grew. The cabin held laughter again. And when the townsfolk spoke of Grace Fletcher, they didn't call her the girl who was sold. They called her the woman who came down the mountain with fire in her eyes and her future in her own hands. She had been caught, yes, shackled, humiliated, but not broken. Because somewhere between who she was and who she dared to become, she realized freedom wasn't a door someone else opened. It was something you built step by step, breath by breath. And love wasn't rescue. It was choosing to stay when you could leave,